Okay, so in the initial introductory bit of practice, I asked you two questions to reflect on. One was, what's the current state of your body and mind? And the other is, what is most inspiring or motivating to you at the moment? So there's a tension between those two things, isn't there? And so for me, that tension is very much the heart of what the middle way is about. So how are you now? What sort of state are you in now? And where do you want to be? What inspires you to be somewhere else? It's specific to the idea of the middle way, I think, to try and keep those two things in tension constantly. So we're not just sailing away into ideal land on the one hand, which is what can lead you into absolute ideal beliefs, or on the other hand, you're not just stuck with how things are now, with whatever limitations those have. So that's central to middle way practice, I think, to start with those two things. Now, this series about archetypes and the middle way is very much, well, it's perhaps more focused on the second of those. So yeah, so what inspires us, and how do we work, how do we try to stay inspired in the practice of the middle way? But obviously, at the same time, we need to not lose sight of where we start. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the middle way we're practicing. So it's possible to have lots of beliefs about our lives, but it's the motivations that are important. So the beliefs that are strong enough to actually change what we do on a regular basis. And so it's inspiration, I think, that makes that difference, that motivates us. So that's what I mean by inspiration, really. The yeah, aspects of our emotional response to things, which grabs our attention, which keeps us going, which reminds us of what we want to do, and so on. And the thing that can get in our way, when we're trying to practice in one way or another, is a lack of integration or a conflict. So our motivations, as we all experience, are inconsistent. So we start off intending to do something and we forget about it, memory lapses, or we just fail to achieve our goals, the ones we set out to achieve. Not because we reconsidered them, but because we just kind of lost the plot, as it were. We can set unrealistic intentions or unrealistic commitments, which then sort of conflict with how we actually are. And of course, that can also have an effect on other people. You can end up with conflicts in our relationships because of those conflicts within ourselves. So those conflicts tend to be reinforced by absolute beliefs. So this is the absolutization which middle way tries to avoid, whether positive or negative. And those absolute beliefs tend to reinforce those conflicts by substituting a belief, a merely conceptual belief, for the actual process of inspiration, for the actual more complex, sort of deeper experience involved in actually changing and being motivated. So it's a shortcut, I think. Absolutization always offers us a tempting shortcut. You take the absolute concepts and the beliefs that you formed out of them. So these substitute for the actual effort and difficulty and complexity of working with that tension between how things are and how they might be. So I think working with our inspirations, and so particularly archetypes, so that is where archetypes come in, can be a central part of integrative practice by helping us to maintain a process of inspiration. So it's one thing having like a set of techniques and things you want to do, like you want to meditate, for example. Set out to do that on a regular basis, but if you're not inspired to do it, then that's not going to help you very much. So actually reflecting on what inspires you or what will actually help you to change is part of the whole bundle of practice, I think. And when I first set out sort of talking about the middle way, I think this is some years ago now, I tended to do so in a slightly sort of over abstract way, which would just offer people kind of a set of explanations and say, oh, well, you could do these practices. And then I remember people perhaps from more religious traditional context might ask me that question, you know, but how do you stay inspired? You know, what's the thing which actually gets you in this? How does it relate to your heart and things like that? So that's a fair question, I think, and it's one that I've tried to work on in recent years, but particularly through these reflections and writing about archetypes, because I'm convinced that archetypes are the key to that issue. So archetypes, this is archetypes in the sense descended from Jung. I see primarily as symbols that inspire us in particular ways. Yeah, so that's their function. So I'm much more interested in how archetypes function than other questions about what they are ultimately or anything of that kind. And very often archetypes as inspiration get confused with or conflated with absolute beliefs. So perhaps the most obvious example of that is spiritual experiences or religious experiences, which people immediately associate with belief in God or belief that God's given them a certain set of instructions, which is not a necessary link. You know, so you don't have to necessarily interpret your spiritual experience in that way. It's an experience. But that experience can be inspiring in one way or another. But there are also other ways of thinking about that confusion. Like so, for example, somebody might have a goal that's very valuable to them. So they have an experience of being attached to that goal. Yeah. So at the moment, for example, I'm busy planting trees. I'm trying to create a forest garden. So I'm very attached to planting these trees and then worrying about whether they get attacked by slugs or, you know, what's going to happen to them. So I could easily kind of get absolute beliefs involved in those goals. Yeah, but obviously maintaining the goal is good. I think, you know, it's a goal I'm committed to. It's great for all sorts of reasons, which I won't go into now. But if I believe, for example, my achievement of the goal was inevitable, or I'm never really going to do it, you know, those would be some obvious ways of absolutizing that goal, of getting absolute beliefs confused with what inspires me about it. So it's not destiny that all the trees will get eaten by slugs, for example, and it's not, you know, it's ambiguous, it's uncertain whether those sorts of things will happen. So archetypes often get confused with absolute beliefs, but basically archetypes are experiences of inspiration. And as such, they are meaning. So distinction between meaning and belief is kind of central to the whole way that I approach this material. I'm not going to go into that in great detail in this session, but the second talk in a month's time will be more about that. So more about the difference between meaning and belief. But just briefly for now, so meaning is a prior condition for belief. So you've got to find something meaningful in order to believe it. But not all meaning is belief. So think about the arts, particularly for meaning that really gets to us, that really inspires us, but you don't have to believe it. So if you read a novel, you're inspired by the characters, perhaps. The characters help you glimpse new potentials, but you don't believe that they're real people. You don't have necessarily have all those assumptions attached to that meaning. So meaning maintains our attention, maintains our engagement with something. So that's why you keep reading the novel, because you find it meaningful. And that meaning can just be in relation to possibilities. It doesn't have to be things that are definitely true or you believe to be true. So that's one of the central things about archetypes, I think, is that we need to appreciate them as meaning. So a lot of what I want to focus on in the rest of this talk is what we mean by meaning, really, what it means to say archetypes are meaning. Okay, so the approach to meaning, which I've made central to middle way philosophy, is derives particularly from the work of George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. So it's generally, well, I prefer to call it embodied meaning. You will also find it described as cognitive linguistics, but I think that's sort of misleading label for it, because it's not necessarily, it's not just cognitive and it's not just linguistic either. So it's an account of meaning, which I think is of great possible practical use to us. So if you think about meaning, maybe one of the first things that people consider when you ask them, what's the meaning of this word, for example, is look it up in a dictionary. So they find a cognitive equivalence of some kind. They want an interchange of signs. The kind of meaning I'm talking about does include that, incorporates that, but it's not just that. The other kind of meaning, so there's cognitive meaning, there's also emotive meaning. So if you find something meaningful, often that means what people often describe as emotive meaning, how it makes you feel. That again is an important part of meaning in general, but it's not the whole thing. So it's cognitive as well. So as a tension here, holding both of those aspects of meaning together. Meaning is also not just linguistic. So words can be meaningful, but also sounds, particularly think about sounds in music, which form melodies and rhythms. Images are meaningful to us, and just objects. So objects particularly that have built up a particular meaning for us. So the tree that you pass every day on your walk has a certain significance for you, a meaning for you. So meaning is not just linguistic, and it's both cognitive and emotive. And what brings those things together is meaning as embodied. So it's about a whole set of relationships between how we experience things in our lives and the things that we find symbolically important or meaningful. Meaning primarily is about the associations we build up in our experience between sets of experiences and symbols. So I'm using symbols in the widest sense, and includes words, images, sounds, etc. Yeah? So anything you find meaningful can be a symbol, and we build up associations with symbols so that they have an impact on us and perhaps inspire us. So if we recognize meaning as embodied, then I think that helps us to work with the impact of archetypal symbols on us. Yeah, so we recognize that archetypal symbols affect and need to affect our whole experience. They're not just something you look up in a dictionary, yeah, so you don't just see that picture of a Tibetan deity and look, oh, what does that mean? Oh yeah, that means evil or whatever it means. That means desire. It's not just an equivalence, it's a wider experience that you have in response to that symbolic thing. And it's also not just your immediate response, your immediate feeling in response to it. So you might find a picture threatening or disconcerting or something like that, but maybe it's worth reconsidering it over a period of time and coming back to it, because then you might find a richer, deeper, more complex experience of it. So it's not just conceptual equivalence, it's not just immediate feeling. The meaning might need a period of time. And particularly archetypal meaning is about things we keep returning to, which build up their meaning through association over time. Okay, so embodied meaning starts off as in infancy, really. So it goes back to infancy and starts off as undifferentiated experience. To some extent, we can go back to that. So, if you entered a very mindful state, for example, so what Buddhists refer to as samadhi or jhana, then you have a less differentiated experience. You could say you have a whole experience of your body and its what is it? There's not a whole lot of different stimuli coming in, and you're not thinking there's this and there's this and there's this. So there's a whole experience, a united experience, an integrated experience. So infants seem to start off with that, but they then gradually need to differentiate. So they have different experiences which stimulate them in particular ways, and then they build up experiences, build up associations with those experiences. So this particular toy, this particular person becomes meaningful in a particular way. So we gradually differentiate the process of developing meaning in ourselves, because it is our experience, is one of differentiation, of gradually building up more and more complex patterns of association. And the way that Lakoff and Johnson explain how we do that, and how that takes us to the really incredibly complex structures of language and so on that we use, uses a few key concepts which I think are worth explaining. So these are image schemas, basic categories, and metaphors. You've probably heard of metaphors, but image schemas are also worth thinking about. So image schemas, they're basically associations between certain types or areas of experience and groups of associated symbols or words. So basically, when we are navigating our early years, we engage with the world actively in one way or another. We do things, we interact with the things around us. We gradually become more aware of having a body and what that body can do and not do in relation to the things around it. So image schemas are the sets of associative meaning we build up when we do that. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. If you want to go into this more, I'll give you a link in the notes, which I'll put on Slack, and you can investigate some further if you wish. Okay, so one example of an image schema is what is known as path, source, goal, or source, path, goal. So that's the basic. It's the kind of meaning we build up from our basic experience of moving towards a goal, which you certainly, well, I imagine you might actually start doing this before you walk, but certainly when you start walking, you're going to start walking towards something that you want to pick up, for example, or interact with. So you're going to have a goal, and you're going to travel along a path to reach that goal. And of course, you also have a starting point. And so that basic experience is behind the meaning of lots of words that we use or symbols that we use. So the idea of a path, well, we couldn't really make sense of a path unless we had that experience of walking along a path or traveling along a path. The idea of a goal, well, the path has to have an end. And also verbs like go, how do we understand what it means to go? How do you understand what it means to walk, etc.? Or even prepositions like to. And I think this all applies in other languages as well, that of course may differ in various ways, but from how it works in English. So that's one example. Another example is what's known as the containers schema. So containers schema is our basic experience of putting things in other things. So perhaps you have a box when you're a young child and you put something in the box and you take it out again. Or perhaps you put something in your mouth and you swallow it. And you get the idea of in. You put something in, you take it out again. And there are containers that you can put things into. So there were boxes, there were buckets, and then perhaps even going on further, there were fields. Again, that helps us understand symbols of things that are contained in some way. So these basic schemas are kind of central to how we start to engage with meaning. Now, I think this does all relate to archetypes, because I think archetypes are meaningful to us as schemas. So we have a certain way of interacting with them over time, and we build up a certain sort of field of meaning in relation to the archetype. Okay, now also in this explanation of meaning, coming from Lakoff and Johnson, there's the idea of basic level categories. These are easier, so they're the things that we identify. So we start to identify in infancy, and so they're the departure point for meaning in relation to a particular kind of thing. So let's say tree is an obvious example, yeah? So probably tree is the word, or an equivalent word will be the word that you use as a child when you get some idea of what a tree is. Say, oh, that's a tree. But maybe if you live in a forest or something, then you might actually start off by saying oak, birch, willow, maybe it'd be more specific, but that depends on your circumstances. Whatever the basic level category is, that's the one you start with. And then you may develop an understanding of subcategories, oak and willow, or more general categories, plant, life form, organism, etc. Yeah. So that's another way we develop meaning, through interacting with objects that we categorize in one way or another. Again, but what that kind of object means depends on our whole experience as an embodied creature. So what tree means might not just be a definition in a dictionary. It's what it means to touch the tree, to climb it, or whatever you do with a tree. And then we develop our sense of meaning through metaphors. That's the other crucial concept. So we've got image schemas, we've got basic categories, and we've got metaphors. So metaphors, well, the word metaphor comes from Greek, where it means carry across. So metaphors, in this case, the meanings of words don't always follow their etymology, but in this case, I think there is a important link. So metaphors carry across meaning from one context to another by making an association. So we start thinking about, a particular kind of thing in one context. We think about a tree in the more basic context of trees in our experience, that oak tree out there. And then we put it in a new context. So we start talking about a family tree. And we understand what a family tree is because of the ability to make metaphorical connections between that original idea and the new context we're using it in. Similarly, the middle way, this is a metaphor, very dependent on the idea of a path, the path source goal that I mentioned earlier. The idea of an academic field is a metaphor dependent on the container schema. The tree of life, an incredibly rich symbol, and depends on the idea of a tree. So all our sense of the meaning of things depends on metaphorical development. And sometimes you can trace that development through etymology. I think that's why etymology is particularly interesting. But sometimes in other ways. But it's through metaphor that we develop the incredibly complex language that we do, where we have all these connections between different contexts. But it all comes back to our basic bodily experience. And I guess that's the thing that people often have trouble getting their heads around, that what's surprising about this embodied meaning approach. That is the recognition that even something incredibly complex, like say an academic paper about physics, even that depends on your body for its understanding. And I won't go into, we could go into a lot more complexity about that, but I'll stop there in terms of exploring that explanation of meaning. But what I want to do now is talk a bit more about their relationship to archetypes. So earlier I mentioned that archetypes are functions. They work in a particular way. They help us by inspiring us. And I also mentioned that archetypes are meaningful to us as schemas. So we get a general set of associations which are meaningful to us through the symbols which have that archetypal function for us. But the specific symbols themselves are metaphors. So archetypes require metaphorical relationships between the sort of base meaning of the archetype and the specific symbol that we encounter. So let's take, I'll talk about a couple of examples. Let's start with the hero archetype. So I think the hero archetype is perhaps the most basic or not interesting one in some ways. So the hero archetype, I would say, is a schema. It comes from our experience of being inspired by perseverance in pursuit of a goal. So you read about the hero, or you perhaps you read about Harry Potter or somebody who is trying to achieve this difficult thing, and that has an effect on you. You recognize what it's like to continue to work on doing that difficult thing. It has an emotional impact. It might change your patterns of attention and so on, if it inspires you. But maybe Harry Potter specifically leaves you cold. Maybe you're not interested in Harry Potter. That's fine. It's not a particular symbol that makes the difference. It's the heroic functions. So probably somebody or something has that function for you. And obviously a lot of this depends on culture as well as your individual experience. So what inspires us to keep going towards our goals depends on the context. So it could be Robin Hood, could be your hero, or could be your mother. Yeah, so complete different kind of type of inspiration. Could be an actual person who has that symbolic function for you, that archetypal function. You know, you reflect on what your mother achieved, and that inspires you. So obviously the hero doesn't have to be male. I think that goes without saying. Yes, so or doesn't even have to be human. So it could be, we've got all sorts of animal heroes in literature, haven't we? So Brer Rabbit. But relating to archetypes in embodied meaning, I think in that way, means understanding that the meaning of the symbol is schematic in our experience, but it's important not to confuse that with features of a specific symbol. Yeah, so there's not just one kind of hero. There's all sorts of different symbols which could have the hero function for us. The hero could be male or female, or the hero might make an effort by fighting, or perhaps through intellectual achievement or something like that. They may be an establishment figure like a king, or they may be very anti-establishment. They may be an anarchist. You know, so all kinds of figures could be heroes. We shouldn't confuse the symbol with the archetype. So if we recognize the archetypes as embodied, that's the key, I think, to recognizing their universality. It's what we have in common with others. Our bodies are similar. We experience meaning in similar ways. We have certain basic similar needs. So we can recognize that. We don't have to substitute absolute beliefs about, you know, everybody should obey God because God gave his revelation in the Bible and this is what you should do. That's confusing the symbol with the archetype. Yeah, so specific symbol, God, works for people in a particular way, and that way of working works in certain contexts, but the archetype is the function in general, and works as a schema for us in general. So approaching archetypes in that way, I think, can help us to draw the dogmatic sting from religion. So I'll talk more about that in the fourth talk, you know, how we can relate this to religion specifically. But yeah, you can particularly there think about the example of God. So God can be inspiring to us because of our experience, which we may associate with God, or it could be some other concept that works in the same way. Could be nature, could be truth, could be Buddha, you know, whatever it is that has that function for us. So it's inspiring because of what it does in our experience, not because of our beliefs about God in a particular religious context, not because of what Christianity or Islam or whatever tells us about these truths about God. So to use all archetypes, whether in religion or not, or in religion or beyond, helpfully for ourselves, I think also means recalling the embodiment of their meaning. Yeah, so that the meaning of the archetype is not just this set of symbols that are used in a particular place. It's something in your body which is similar to what other people experience in their bodies in certain ways. But it's not just the specific conceptual expression. So if we can get in the habit of thinking of archetypes as embodied, then hopefully we can find points of constant inspiration from archetypal symbols without getting into absolute claims about them. If we can avoid absolute claims, then we can also avoid a whole load of conflict, perhaps within ourselves and perhaps with other people, which goes with those absolute claims. So we can hopefully find the helpful aspects of those symbols. Okay, that's probably enough of me talking. I think I've, more or less, no, I've slightly overrun, I think. Anyway, I suspected I might. So let's have a bit of time for questions about that practice. But so we could have 10 minutes now of questions about the talk, or could be questions, could be comments, could be examples that come up for you. Yeah, so anything you'd like to contribute really in response to the ideas in the talk.
Well, I was thinking about the idea of language game in Wittgenstein, and trying to, when you were talking about the function of archetypes as symbols, not confusing symbol for belief, and connecting it to an embodied state, which makes it more universal. I was thinking about language game as a container, in the sense that when you play different ones, you leave one and move into another one. And that makes a lot of sense to me. Another thing that I'd been thinking about was that I'm just thinking about it now, but it's the idea of embodiment being sociologically informed by the kind of culture and family and society that we are shaped in. And I'm wondering if there's a process of differentiation where you separate from those kind of inculcated symbols and you develop your own.
Yeah, I think that's quite an important thing. Is obviously we start in a particular cultural context where we're likely to depend on particular symbols that we share with other people, whether, quite often say national symbols or religious symbols or whatever, or ethnic symbols. And as we develop, we gain a wider range of we extend our repertoire of symbols, you could say, so that we then have more flexibility as to how we can think about things. And that's what I talk about as the integration. Okay, so yeah, the integration of meaning, bringing together more symbols, and or increasing our engagement with symbols so that they're more meaningful to us. Yeah, so a diversity of experience can really help with that. And I've been very struck with the Middle Way Society, but a lot of people who've become involved in it have had some sort of breadth of experience, whether that's traveling or maybe being involved in different disciplines academically, or maybe dipping their toes into different religions or whatever it might be. And that means that you become, I think, it becomes easier to not get too hung up on specific symbols as well, and to get more of a sense, more of a contextual sense of the meaning of the symbols that we do use. Okay, any other thoughts?
I was wondering about this that you mentioned with a child sort of having this undifferentiated meaning, or an infant, and then gradually developing it, because I think that many, or at least as I understood that many religions have this experience of the undifferentiated meaning as sort of one of the main goals. So I'm wondering if that is also, I mean, maybe that's, I don't know, for me, I feel like that's helpful to, like having experienced that is very helpful to understand that the meaning, that the source of the meaning is yourself and not really the symbol. So then it kind of protects you sort of from projection, I guess. Do you think this is sort of the meaning of it? Or?
Yeah, the experience in yourself is what the meaning of the symbol. Yes, I think that's it. That's the important aspect of embodied meaning. Yeah, but I don't know if you're asking something there about undifferentiated meaning, particularly, were you?
Yeah, I guess this experience of experiencing the state, and you will, I think, will make it very obvious to you that the meaning is coming from inside you somehow. That it's not attached to these symbols.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there is well, there's a very useful term which I get from Ken Wilber. I haven't used Ken Wilber very much, but he has this term, the pre-trans fallacy, which I think is very useful as regards this idea of undifferentiated meaning. So that is that you can have kind of integration of a sense or unity at the beginning, and then you can come back to it through a process of development, a process of integrative development. And sometimes people confuse those two things: the undifferentiated starting point and the more integrated finishing point or continuation point. That's what's known as the pre-trans fallacy. So yeah, I'm not suggesting, obviously, by talking about an infant as undifferentiated in its meaning, I'm not suggesting that's a desirable state, because it's only through going through the differentiation that we then develop a much more complex experience of meaning that the baby doesn't have, obviously. So I wouldn't say that it's babies aren't enlightened or anything like that, but it's perhaps helpful to reflect on as a starting point for meaning. Any other thoughts?
Well, that just made me think of beginner's mind and how that would fit with all this, but that wasn't what my question was earlier. Just thinking about interfaith dialogue and the various meanings that people find in different symbols. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts about how to go about having interfaith dialogue with symbols that are so completely different and that have cultural associations that could be quite counter between religions. Like, if you were Muslim and you think about the Crusades, or Jewish, and I mean, they're how does one communicate well between, among people with very different archetypes that inspire them? I'm really interested in learning about that.
Well, I think bearing in mind the embodiment of meaning can be really helpful for that, in that if you want to communicate to someone who hasn't had the same cultural experience what something means to you, then try and get back to the universal human embodied experience in some way. So I suppose particularly, if we've gone through a very intellectual process with the symbols that we're using, like studying theology, for example, then we're used to talking in a particular way about those symbols, and a lot of that can be meaningless to somebody who's not got that background. But if we can get back to more basic experience, then I think that can help. So I guess, I think I've tried to do that to some extent by talking about religious experience, say. relating religious experience to, well, it could be quite simple experiences of openness, I relate to religious experience, for example. So if you are in a hemmed-in situation and you suddenly enter a larger landscape, you get a feeling of relief and openness. And that's a very basic experience, I think, of the kind of thing which developed and ramped up might be associated with religious experience. There's an opening of some kind. So if you were talking about what it's like to have this say Jewish or Muslim or Christian or whatever approach to God, if you can get back to something like that sort of a basic openness that everybody might experience, I think maybe that helps to connect, to connect together the different metaphorical symbolic developments by getting back to the roots of where they start. Does that make any sense, do you think, Susan? Or?
Yes, it does, but it definitely limits the symbols. I mean, you really need to be very cautious with your symbols when you're having interfaith dialogue. I think that's what you're saying. You would talk about the experience and not the symbol, because the symbol could get you in a lot of trouble. That's my experience. I mean, I can speak as a Jew who went to it was interfaith, it was various branches of Judaism, rabbinic students. And I said something about the Torah that I thought it was being used as a idol. I said my own embodied experience of Torah, of the actual object. And it was extremely offensive to an Orthodox Jew. And I regretted having said it, because it was, and we talked about it, and we talked it through, and I learned something and he learned something, and it was okay. But I had the actual experience of using a symbol, of not recognizing the importance of an object to someone else and having a different experience of that object than that person. So it's quite fraught. I mean, I think it's a bit of a you have to be very careful with archetypes, with as you said, they're not symbols, they're what the meaning is, but you have to be careful about, even as you described, what that archetype is to you. It could be something very different to someone else.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues there which are to do with navigating the relationship between meaning and belief, and also how people discuss beliefs and how to use critical thinking in a helpful way in relation to beliefs, as well as maintaining a sense of the meaning of what we're talking about. So we will come back to that point, which is a very important one, I think. Okay, I think we better move on then to just talking about the practice focus, and so we've got a little bit of time to discuss that further. I'm just going to talk you through the practice focus. Yeah, basically takes the form of 5 stages. So I will just perhaps explain each of them and then give you maybe a minute to reflect on it. Yeah, in each case. Those 5 stages, as I said earlier, I will put my notes about this on Slack, and you can refer to the explanation of those 5 stages there if you want. Yeah. Okay, so but for the moment, maybe just concentrate on the process as a practice. Okay, so first stage, identify a symbol that inspires you. Okay, so here are a few suggestions just to prompt your imagination. So it might be, for example, a motif in art that inspires you, maybe a Buddha figure, or maybe an Annunciation scene or something. It could be an object like an oak tree you pass on your walk. It could be a significant piece of music. It could be a person, for example, your grandmother. It could be a concept like nature or truth or something like that. Okay, so identify a symbol that inspires you. I'll just give you a minute to reflect on that. Okay, so once you identified the symbol, next stage is imagine the symbol. So it could be, that could be visualizing where you've encountered it, or just seeing it, or thinking about it. So what does it feel like to encounter that symbol? And what are the associations that make it inspiring for you? Okay, so I'll just give you another minute on that. So you've identified the symbol, now imagine the symbol. Okay, and then the third stage is reflect on the origin of the symbol. So where does this symbol come from? Does it have a metaphorical relationship with other symbols? If it's a word, or if it's associated with a word, does it have an etymology? What's its origin? How does it come to have the meaning that it has, either for you individually or culturally? Okay, and then the fourth stage, reflect on the function of this symbol for you. So how does that symbol inspire you? For example, does it help you to reach a goal? Does it help you to maintain a relationship? Does it help you avoid a threat? Does it just help you to be aware of new possibilities? Those are all very typical archetypal functions. But however it does, see if you can identify how the symbol inspires you. Okay, and then the final stage, reflect on the unique function of this symbol for you in your embodied situation. So you might imagine how other people get the same function from a different symbol. So, for example, if you got a particular inspiration from the figure of Christ as a Christian, how might other people get that function from other images? Or imagine how others might get a different function from a similar symbol. So how might people experience Christ instead as a threat, for example? Okay, so however you do it, just reflect on the uniqueness of that symbol for you in your embodied situation and how that might differ from others. Okay, so just to run over those 5 stages again. So there's identify a symbol. There's imagine the symbol, what it feels like. There's the origin of the symbol or the source of the symbol. There's the function of the symbol, how it inspires you. And there's the uniqueness of the symbol for you in your embodied situation. Okay, so my suggestion is, as a practice focus, is that you repeat this process with different symbols that inspire you on a regular basis over the next month. So see if you can keep coming back to that process. So hopefully that might have the effect of deepening your relationship to the symbol, yeah, but also widening the awareness of your specific relationship to it. That it's about you and your body in relation to that symbol, rather than the symbol in itself as a separate thing. So you could go through that process in a kind of meditation context if you find that helpful. You could sit in meditation posture and go through those stages, or you could just sit reflecting when you've got a spare moment, or you could go for a walk and go through those stages reflecting, or you could write it down. So you can have a kind of journaling approach. Or you could talk it through with someone else. So another thing you might possibly want to do, you could pair up with someone else in this group at an arranged time and talk through some symbols in your experience. Anyway, my suggestion is just that you try and go through those 5 elements in one way or another to reflect on your relationship to that symbol as embodied for you. Okay, so any questions about that suggested practice? Susan, you're muted.
Try. I'm wondering about how important the origin of the symbol is. I mean, I was with you everywhere, except I got confused by the origin. Is that important?
Okay.
I mean, why is that important, I guess is my question.
Well, it helps to put it in a context. Yeah, that the symbol has come from a particular context. So if, for example, you're working with a Jewish symbol, so you mentioned the Torah earlier, then obviously you could reflect on where the Torah comes from. But that may just be incredibly obvious to you, and knowing that you're a trained rabbi, it may not be at all necessary to reflect on those things. So do use your discretion. If things are totally obvious to you, there's no point in spending a lot of time reflecting on them. But you might need to refine the process to work on the aspects that are important for you to work on.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, thoughts?
I have a quick question. Does it have to be something that's like a recurring symbol, or maybe, I don't know, supposed to go deeper into things? Because I feel like there's a lot of, or more and more, like I feel like there's a lot of things that inspire me, like randomly. So, but then I guess you could say maybe you try to find out what is the symbol, if it's a recurring one or something, or can it be something really, really that suddenly comes up and I'm like,
Exactly. Yeah, that will be the value of doing it over a period of time. I think that if you're sitting down now to think, oh, what inspires me? What are my inspiring symbols? You may come up with obviously a few, but it may strike you later that actually those were less important than another thing that's actually comes back. It doesn't have to be
necessarily these big things that are like.
Yeah. So yeah, they're not necessarily the things that you might formally think are most important, and I think that can be the case for perhaps people who are committed to a religion, say sometimes. So they think, oh well, if they're Christians, say Jesus is really important to me, but maybe he isn't. Maybe that's just what they feel they ought to feel, as it were. But what's actually inspiring to you? What actually makes a difference to you, rather than what do you think you ought to feel inspired by? Yeah, so obviously, if you have a process of reflecting in that way, perhaps on several symbols over a period of time, then hopefully you can begin to distinguish between ones that are actually more important to you and others that are less important, but also get a sense of their context for you. Another suggestion, actually, another thing you can do, and this is taking a leaf out of the Buddhist book, is you could develop some sort of what Buddhists would call a shrine, and that is you put some sort of representation of your symbol somewhere important, a mantelpiece or a shelf or something, and you start collecting things associated with it. Yeah, so that might be a way of concretizing it more. Make your symbol into something that you can keep coming back to, and that reminds you to think about it. But obviously that process can become very formalistic as well. So you set up your important symbol and you think, oh, that's going to keep inspiring me, and then you forget about it. So it's very easy to get habituated as well to things like that. So the most important thing is keeping coming back to it on a regular basis. Any other questions or thoughts? George?
I'm wondering, Robert, should we be looking at something when you say it really has to make a difference? Should we be looking to, over the next month, to see if our behavior or mindset or emotional state or physical environment actually transforms in some way? Should make it
maybe, but maybe that's a lot to ask. But yeah, if it does, then that's great. I mean, maybe that's related to the function bit. Yeah, so reflecting on how something inspires you. Does it make a difference? What sort of difference does it make? Yeah. So for example, if you're supposing you're reflecting on, or maybe your parents set you a great example of a wonderful relationship. You keep reflecting on that. Does it make a difference to your immediate relationship with your partner? Yeah, or not? You might want to make those sorts of connections. Okay, well, I think we're probably getting to the point where we need to wind up. So the idea of the program is that we will have a follow-up session in 2 weeks. So the follow-up session for this will be on the 15th of May. I think there's still some discussion which we need to have about exactly how that follow-up session will be organised, but I think it will involve Jim and possibly James and possibly George, but we'll have to sort that out. But anyway, there will be some people facilitating the follow-up session. So I'm not going to be involved in that myself, because I think we'll create a different sort of context. Yeah, so a follow-up session is just about you sharing what you've experienced, and possibly in smaller groups. You might break up into breakout groups depending on the number of people. You may want to discuss exactly how you go about it. But the key thing is that it's an opportunity to share in a much more informal way what we've been doing and how you're getting on with it. And any thoughts about it, obviously. So then we'll come back for the next talk at the beginning of June. So again, it's like the first Sunday in each month, basically. So the first Sunday in June is the next one. Sorry, not, yeah, first of June. So 1st of May now, first Sunday in June will be the next one. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you again in a month's time, hopefully.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening, everyone.
Bye.